Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin, and joining me today is Sara Newson, founder of Realm 47 Property Investors and Developers, and Andrew Binstock, Director of Auction House London. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hope you both had a good trip in. Now, as you know, this is the show where you can have your property-related questions answered by our experts. So, Sara, we're going first with you. With new legislation on the cards, how does the panel think that the new possession regulations will affect the lease documentation for HMOs? HMO residents tend to have a higher churn rate than buy-to-let, and I wonder if the new regs will help or hinder levels of occupation. And I guess the sort of question behind the question there is, are you going to end up with sort of almost sitting tenants in HMOs, which might not be that desirable? I don't know. I've never had one, but perhaps you can help us.
Yeah, I've got quite a lot of experience with HMOs, and obviously the renters reform is not quite there yet, so it's still a bit hypothetical.
If ever.
If ever. But we heard a couple of weeks ago that they are looking at having an initial fixed term of 6 months from the tenant's perspective, which in an odd way kind of brings us round back to what we've already got, doesn't it?
It does really.
I'm starting to feel like, what was the purpose of all of this?
Yes.
So eliminating section 21 is the main purpose now, which is the non-fault evictions. I think personally, the way I used to run my HMOs when I managed them was I would always have a 6-month initial term, and then they would run onto a periodic month-by-month tenancy anyway. So I don't see much change from that. I think that the tenants have got the same situation. They're going to be able to stay for 6 months, and then they've got flexibility to stay for as long as they want. I don't really see this impacting occupancy at all.
You don't?
I don't see it changing their plans. They generally, in my experience, stay on average about 12 to 18 months. And I really don't see it changing that much from the tenant's perspective. I don't see any benefits from their perspective, and I don't see benefits from ours. I think if they didn't put that 6 months fixed term in, there would be issues, because we would see tenants coming and going and using it as more of a serviced accommodation type facility. Yes. And that would open up a whole load of problems in terms of HMO licensing. Then is it a C4 use class still in terms of planning? There would just be so much ripple effects. Your fire regulations, you'd need higher fire regs, because it would be more like a hotel situation. They wouldn't be that familiar with the property. So the knock-on impact of the Renters Reform Act could have been insane. It could have been so highly impactful and caused so much damage, and I think they would have ended up having to change things very quickly if they'd brought it in as it was. So the next reading is coming up, at which point hopefully we'll have more information and more certainty.
I hope so. I mean, I just hope that it does become very clear, because I mean, in Andrew's business, for instance, in auction, I mean, I imagine that part of your pack, if you're selling an HMO, is, well, let's see the tenancy agreements and let's see what's what. I suppose if we get naughty tenants, we can always send them to Rwanda now, can't we?
Very topical.
Got to fill the planes up somehow. Well, I mean, it's only, what was it, 1.8 million per passenger, isn't it? So,
yes.
Yeah.
Good value.
Yeah. I wondered if it would be cheaper just to give them 100 grand each and tell them to go. Yeah,
not sure about that.
Well, 1.8 million a time it would be. Okay. Well, thank you for that. Have you got anything to add to that, Andrew?
Not especially. I mean, we see obviously a lot of HMOs at auction. They're traditionally governed by the rental values and obviously the strength of the tenancies. And as you say, when you're buying, any prudent buyer is going to want to see the tenancy agreements and just the sort of likelihood of that income being stable, and not having loads of empty voids. So that's all over that.
Yeah. Do you think we're ready for a new type of perhaps lease for HMOs, a specific? Well, I mean, it's really caught on, hasn't it? I mean, it takes quite a slice of the market.
Yeah, absolutely. I think from the student perspective, if you look at it from the student side of things, yes, I mean, that is going to have to differentiate because they're generally in for 12 months, 48 to 52 weeks of the year. But there is already talk of there being something different for students there, because at the end of the day, all that landlords are going to do is front end the rent. So if the courses finish in May, they're going to say, well, we'll charge you till May, and then you get those extra 2-3 months for free.
Yeah.
So there's always solutions to it, but I think ultimately there may be a different setup in terms of lease and paperwork for students versus professional lets.
I'm very keen on keeping things up to date, and I think the whole sort of lease situation needs looking at, really. I mean, people do get very confused. I understand that certain tenants want longevity of their occupation. That's fine. There should be a type of lease for that. And then there is a sort of natural short-term tenant who perhaps is on secondment to a geographically different place to their normal home, or just need somewhere for 6 months or whatever. I just think we need to just be a bit more flexible over these things.
I agree.
You know, it's not sort of one size fits all, is it, really?
No, absolutely.
Not suitable. Okay, thank you for that. Andrew, it seems that there's a large movement towards selling residential properties through auction rather than conventional estate agencies. Can the panel confirm this is the trend, along with its cause?
Okay, specifically, about 2% of properties are finding their way into auction across all land registry sales in a typical year. So it's still very small amounts. But the person who's asked the question is right. In London in particular, there has been a huge upsurge in the amount of stock finding its way into auction. Quite why is debatable. Is it because the estate agency model has started to show flaws and it's started to annoy certain sellers and they're now using auction as a last resort? Or have the media and certain programs and educational pieces like this started to show auctions in a better light? We don't really know the answer to that. I can only speak from experience as an auctioneer based in London, and it's not just us, it's also our competitors too. The amount of volume has just gone crazy over the last couple of years. So much so that most of us are now doing 2-day sales just to try and fit in all the lots that we've been asked to sell.
And I suppose really, the extended time it's now taking for a conveyance is also another factor,
Exactly,
isn't it?
yeah.
I mean, I don't know, if I come to you, what does it take me, 1 or 2 months to put it with you and get it?
No, 1 or 2 days.
1 or 2 days.
Yeah, you
Well,
can instruct us on the Wednesday. The auction will be launched on the Thursday or the Friday. The auction itself will then take place 2 weeks later. And you don't even need to wait for the auction, of course, you can sell it before then. But the entire start to finish process can be as little as 5 or 6 weeks.
That's fantastic.
And that's to completion. Exchange can be 2 weeks. The amount, and I read something even today about gazumping and gazundering seems to be back. There is a lot of antiquated features of the private treaty model, the estate agency model, that is now, going back to your question, pushing people into auctions who may never have even thought of it in the first place. And it is that speed, it is that sort of efficiency, it is that lack of waste. Because how frustrating if you spent money on a solicitor, you've had surveys done, you've done searches, whatever, and then for whatever reason, you don't even get to buy it.
Well, you see, in the end, it's all about true values, isn't it? And what the auction does do is find the true value.
100%.
And I mean, I was reading something the other day, I think it was Rightmove came up with it, that it said, if you actually put your property on too high at an unrealistic figure, it's all very well perhaps an agent saying, well, reduce it then after a few weeks. But they're saying that if you show a reduced price, you're 20% less likely to sell that property because people don't want to buy something that other people are rejecting.
100%.
And I mean, that's quite an interesting theory, isn't it?
Well, we have a saying that estate agents start high to get low. So i.e. they will put it on at an inflated price and then work the seller down.
And you go
and
the other way.
auctioneers, we start low and we, through competitive bidding, we get high. And that sounded wrong, but you know what I mean. The reality is, if you've got whatever it is, whether it's one of these cameras, whether it's a house, whether it's an expensive pen or whatever, if you put every single person that might want it into a room, force them to scream and shout numbers at the auctioneer and push them, push and push, you are far more likely to get a higher price doing it that way than the current way of selling a house right now through an estate agent.
Yeah. Do you agree with that, Sara?
Yeah, I think it's very much based on geographics. I think in some places auctions work very well and in others they don't. I think from a homeowner perspective as well, perhaps auctions aren't going to work because it's all very well them selling their property quick, but then they're in a chain, and where do they go? They'll need temporary accommodation. Yeah. So,
or you marry. Well, that's a great question, by the way. A great point. You just marry up your completion date. So you're right. If you're in a really lengthy chain, it's not quite so easy. But if it's a sort of 2-person chain, I just need to sell to buy this. You just marry up the completion dates, and a lot of people don't understand that that's possible. Everyone thinks it's 4 weeks set in stone. It's not. The seller has the right to make that completion date any date they want it to be. You can actually set, not just weeks, you can actually make the date. Completion will be on May the 23rd, if that's the date you need to be completing by. So I'm glad you brought that up, because that's...
And are you happy with that as an auctioneer to take that instruction?
We will take whatever instructions the seller wants when it comes to things like completion. If they say nothing at all, it's 4 weeks. It's 20 working days. But anyone who asks us, well, that doesn't work for me, we'll just say, well, simply change the completion date in the legal pack, and you can have any completion date that works for you. And I'm glad this came up because so many people don't know that.
Okay, thank you very much for that. That's all we've got time for in this half of the show. So join me again after the break when we'll be asking Andrew and Sara more of your questions. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and I'm joined by Sara Newson and Andrew Binstock. Welcome back, guys.
Thank you.
Right, Sara, has the cancellation of the northeast elements of HS2 had any adverse effects on property values in those areas, or have the proposed transport improvements promised funded by the savings from HS2 compensated?
Interesting.
Possibly not.
Well, I think firstly, is that money actually there to be spent? Because they initially budgeted, was it 26 billion for this, and then it was coming in at 70 odd. The first leg cost them in the 30s, and then they've already gone over budget. Is there really that budget there to spend? Anyhow, ignoring that for a moment, I think it's a bit of speculation here. I think because that HS2 line wasn't in yet, the property prices hadn't been affected. So I think they could have gone up and they could have seen, a boom potentially, a small one. But I think that is very much speculation. What I do think is that Birmingham will definitely benefit from it with the line from the HS2 line, and London, because what we would have seen was people going out to Manchester and Leeds.
If it comes into London.
Of course. But you would have seen people leaving and going out, and sort of the businesses have relocated up there already. Businesses relocated to Leeds.
I suppose where the question is coming from here is that in London in particular, you get something new like the Elizabeth line and people station chase, don't they, as far as property is concerned. They think, right, it's going to be a station here, so I'll move there. It's going to be another new station there. Yeah. And I don't know. I mean, I came to London, I'm just trying to think how long ago now, about 35 years ago. And everybody was telling me that Commercial Road was the place to be. Well, I was still waiting. I still wouldn't like to get out of my car after dark there, I mean, it's just, Andrew, you must have seen a lot of this.
Absolutely.
And, it takes a long time. I mean, when I came to London, I worked at Tower Bridge on Butler's Wharf and those buildings down there. And it actually really took around about 20 years to become established. And that's quite a cycle time. So nothing's instant, is it? And
no.
I'm just very suspicious of this HS2, whether it'll do anything or not. And I don't know whether, clearly it was out of control money-wise, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
It went from, I think it was 25 billion as the original quote, and it ended up at about 150, 160.
Oh, did it go up that high?
Yeah. That's when they decided they wouldn't bring it into London. They would stop 15 miles outside, and then you get a bus or something into town, after your super quick train journey.
Yeah.
So I'm just very sceptical of government's plans. I mean, we have a four-year political cycle, and I suppose it's very difficult to put into action long-term plans, isn't it?
I'd like to see where that money is going to go in terms of the
it's not there, is it?
Transport. That is it. Is it? Does it exist?
I think I saw the borrowing figures. I think we borrowed 120 billion last month. Well, where's that money going? Was that part of that destined for HS2. I don't know. I don't know where they get it from. I mean, they obviously haven't got it, have they?
No.
So I'm not making light of the loss of your extension up in the north there, but I mean, it's a very touchy subject, and I do sympathise for the areas that have the perception of being left behind. You know, I think we are very spoilt for things in London sometimes.
Definitely.
I think the country's overcrowded and they needed to push things out a bit, full stop. I think that, you know, that we do need other spaces, other cities, other centres for main businesses to operate from, instead of just being in London. But in terms of being left behind, I don't feel like I'm being left behind, Stephen. You're all right.
Okay. Okay. Well, I thought you might start to tell me off or something. tell me I'm too London-centric or something. Andrew. I'm considering putting my properties on the market and I'm trying to decide whether to use an agent or an auction house. My difficulty is to decide whether an auction house will give my properties a wide enough level of exposure compared to an agent who uses the wide range of property portals available. There you go.
Okay, well, that's very easy to answer because all the property portals the estate agents are using, we use too.
Right.
And any reputable auctioneer will be on every single portal that the estate agency models will throw their properties into. Plus, we have more. We have auction-centric ones as well. So I don't know if we're allowed to name names, but the main players in the portal market are covered by us. In terms of exposure, and this is exactly one of the arguments I always say when choosing your auctioneer, make sure you're using an auction company who has maximum exposure for your property, because exposure plus a talented auction team is what's going to drive your price up. You need to market, you need to capture every single audience person that might want to bid, plus you then need the people that can conduct the auction in a good and positive way and enforce that we extract every single possible bid from the day. So those are your two key ingredients. The other thing about exposure as well is on the auction day itself now, because of the way the current model is working, which is effectively our live stream model, some people are just doing online only, but either way, having moved away from the ballroom, which was quite specific to an afternoon, someone's got to come to London, they've got to park, they've got to find somewhere to do the congestion. You know, if you had a few hundred people in that room, you've done well. Now, we would expect to see, well, at least 2,000 people bidding, and at any moment in time, the physical number of viewers on that moment is up to 1,500 people at any given moment. So that's sort of exposure as well. People who are just browsing, just seeing how it all works, just maybe even deciding whether they might use auctions in the future by having a little look and seeing how it's going today. So in terms of exposure, whether you're a seller trying to market your property or you're a potential browser looking to get into that world, we've never had more exposure as an industry as we do right now. And shows like yours and other ones on other channels are just feeding into that as well. So it's a great time for the auction industry right now.
Okay. Tell me, Andrew, I know we've touched on this subject before when we've talked to you, but there is a perception by quite a lot of people that if something's in an auction, there's something wrong with it, or it's just not quite the way to go, especially with residential property. As somebody who's very experienced now as a market leader in online auctions, do you have a sort of department that would guide a newbie into the system? So in other words, if I was a nervous householder, I mean, can I phone you up and have a chat, or how does it work?
Okay, so not only is the answer to that the firmest yes I could ever do, but we have seen an amazing number of people who have never ever used auctions, whether buying or selling before, who come to us. I think for whatever reason, the sort of people that we get to see are very much in that world of newbies, as you call it. Not only are there tons of guides online about how to buy and sell at auction, but if you were to call the office and speak to anyone, they would be only too delighted to walk you through that process and hold your hand. You know what? The truth is, it's not that difficult. There's this myth back in the day, and I think of my dad's generation, where it was this sort of underground club of only really sort of professional, experienced people who were convening at these commercial auctions, and they all knew what was going on. You know, we're primarily residential, and that brings us into a world of people who have never done this before. It's not complicated. It's really transparent. And if you have even the slightest inkling of what you're doing, there's no real hurdles to overcome. Ask. If you don't know, what does it mean in this legal pack? What do you mean check for fees? What do you mean check for this? Ask. It's really simple, and we will be very happy to tell you. A prudent buyer will have no problems buying at auction, that is for sure.
Sarah, is this a facility you use at all?
Not too often, actually. We were talking about this just before.
Are we persuaded now?
Almost, yeah. Almost. No, I think it's a very, very valid point, what Andrew was saying. And I think with regards to the question, you know, there's so much more than just using the portals to get exposure for your property. And it's about choosing an auctioneer well and choosing an estate agent well and looking at them, how proactive they're going to be, how good they are. Because, you know, obviously Andrew's from a fantastic auctioneers, but there's going to be ones as well that perhaps aren't as proactive and will perhaps just put your property on Rightmove and hope for the best. So I think there's a lot more to look at there.
It's interesting. We'll touch on this another time, but one of the questions we're asked quite a lot here is what's next after the portals, and whether a new form of selling will take place. AI controlled. I don't know.
I'm fascinated by how
one of the interesting comments we had the other day, of course, they were talking about where AI gets its information from, and of course it gets it from trolling the internet. But of course, what it can't do yet is decide what it's trolling is either good or bad.
True.
So it tends to take both and mix. So you've still got to watch what you're doing, I'm afraid, haven't you?
You have. The worry for us is could somebody eventually type into a portal in the style of Andrew Binstock, please sell off my house this way, this, and then I'm redundant. I'm no longer required. There's a robot will just take me over.
Well, we'll give you a job.
Thank you. I'll just come here instead every time.
Well, there we are. I'm going to say a big thank you to Andrew Binstock and Sara Newson for coming on the show today. Thank you both very much indeed. Great answers to the questions. I'm Stephen Galpin. Join me again next time on Property Question Time.